Welcome everybody. We're going to kick off our session properly. As I say, keep feeling free to introduce yourselves in the chat, drop your name, where you're joining from. There's the Padlet link for a little bit of fun activity as well. But we're going to start the session properly, the one that you've all come to watch. So thank you for joining Reserva the Youth Land Trust session entitled Youth-Led Biodiversity Conservation. It's really great to see so many people joining from all over the world, and I'm sure the Padlet will look really interesting after this session is done. So before diving into the session properly, I'm just going to sort of introduce the Reserva's track session, but also a bit more about what we're going to be doing today. Starting by introducing myself. I'm Joe Wilkins, and I'm the Conventions and Policy Officer at Reserva the Youth Land Trust. With my, a little bit about me, with a scientific background but a love for policy, I sometimes describe myself as the personification of the science policy interface. Very background in ecology, but moving forward into policy and conservation. And I'm really interested in sort of the youth involvement and empowerment in conservation and environmental policy, which is what led me to reach out to Reserva the Youth Land Trust to join. Reserva is an organisation that empowers young people to make a measurable difference for the threatened species and habitats through conservation, education and storytelling. This goes deep into our ethos and our structure, but I don't want to take up too much time because I know our first speaker is going to be talking about this in a lot more detail and doing it a lot more justice than I ever could. So we'll have to wait, but our track session will be running over 2 days. Our first one will be all about the sort of nitty-gritty of setting up a youth-led organisation, using Reserva as a case study, and then we'll be very fortunate to be joined by 4 incredible individuals, each from different youth-led organisations, for a little panel discussion. So whilst this is going on, have a think of any questions that you'd like to ask if you're on the start of possibly starting your own organisation, or you just want to know a little bit more about the running of an organisation, then this is the place to be today. And then tomorrow at the same time, we have a second session on conservation storytelling and the power of young voices, which promises to be a really exciting session. We've got some great panelists and some great guests. Dr. Enrique Sala from Pristine Seas, Dr. Paula Kahumbu from Wildlife Direct in Kenya, and a great panel of young storytellers from around the world. So do join us tomorrow. So a little bit more about today's session. We're going to have 2 presentations by Callie Broadus and James Miller, who are part of Reserva. Then we'll have a little fun mid-session activity based around the Padlet that we've just started. So if you haven't done that, again, the link is in the chat. Feel free just to do that. Tell us where you're from and possibly your first name. After that activity, we'll be having the panel that I mentioned, featuring some of the guests you see here: Izzy Warren, Liz Watuti, KM Reyes, Marina Melanidis, and they'll be talking all about the sort of logistical and practicalities of a youth-led organisation. So possibly the stuff that people don't think about, but it's really vital if we're going to create long-lasting and permanent change through these youth-led organisations. And then we'll have a little conclusion and final activity to end our session today. Just to remind people, do feel free just to keep introducing yourselves in the chat. As each of the presenters is going on, ask any questions and we'll pick them up, or possibly we'll have time for a little bit of live Q&A as well. But if you drop them in the chat, we'll be sure to pick them up and ask them. And if they can't answer them all live, then we'll collate them and possibly we can send out a little information packlet with some answers afterwards. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce Callie Broadus. Callie is the founder and executive director of Reserva at the Youth Land Trust and was recently named to the inaugural class of the Explorers Club 50, which is 50 people changing the world needs to know about. Prior to launching Reserva, Callie was a senior designer at National Geographic Kids, where she worked for 7 years, cementing her passion for wildlife photography and youth education. She has worked around the world, photographing rhinos in Botswana, documenting sea level rise in the Marshall Islands, and leading Reserva's participation in research expeditions to the Ecuadorian Chaco. And I believe Callie is going to be talking to us about Reserva the Youth Land Trust and sort of the background scenes that need to be done for a youth-led organisation. So Callie, I'm going to hand over to you. I will stop sharing my screen and then you can start sharing and Again, any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can pick them up, and hopefully we'll have a chance to answer them at the end. So thank you, Callie.
Thanks, Joe. What an intro. Yeah, so I'm going to share my screen and go through a little bit about Reserva so you can get to know us if you haven't heard of us before. And I'm going to talk through some of what we do, as well as how we started and how we formed this organization. So I hope that there are people in the audience who are thinking about starting an organization, or who have an idea for a problem they want to solve. And if you are kind of on that cusp of starting something, or wondering if you should support another organization, I'm going to get to some of those thinking points later. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, we can see it, Callie.
All right, cool. I'm not going to put it into slideshow mode because I want to see these little thumbnails on the left. But so we are Reserva, and as Joe said, we formed around this idea of empowering young people to protect threatened habitats and species through the lenses of conservation, education, and storytelling. And from a conservation perspective, we formed around this flagship project, this idea that we could create an entirely youth-funded nature reserve. And through my research, as I was thinking up this idea originally, it started as just an initial project, and I found that there hadn't been one. There wasn't an entirely youth-funded nature reserve anywhere in the world, and that kind of surprised me, because half of this world is youth, half of the world is 31 or younger, and of course the UN definition of youth is 35 and younger. So if you take that definition, it's a lot more than half. And I've noticed that at the world stage, you get a lot of young people speaking. You have a lot of world leaders who say they're listening to young people, and yet we haven't seen the quick action that is needed to actually save this planet and to prevent catastrophic climate change and biodiversity loss. And so I thought, there's a disconnect between hearing young people and actually acting on what they're asking for. And to me, that comes down to power. Older people in government have the power, and if they don't think of young people as having their own type of power, then they aren't as likely to listen. And so I thought of financial power, and who has financial power? Governments, corporations, businesses, they have financial power. And young people aren't traditionally thought of as a group that has financial power traditionally. And so we decided to redefine that through some creative solutions to fundraising and things like that I'll get into later, and that James Miller, who's presenting after me, will really dive into. We decided to kind of pitch this idea to world governments that, hey, young people aren't just speaking, we are acting, and we can exert our financial power as half of the world to start protecting habitats. So we'll lead by example, and you can follow us. So all that said, we launched around this flagship project, creating the world's first entirely youth-funded nature reserve. And we teamed up immediately with a group called Rainforest Trust. It's an organization in the US. They're also in the UK and I believe Australia. And they protected 30 million acres of endangered habitat around the globe. And we decided to team up with them because rather than reinventing the wheel, there are a lot of organizations that protect habitat very well and that fund conservation very well. It's just that none of them had prioritized youth donors. So we teamed up with Rainforest Trust, who are able to do all those things they do well, and we're just kind of bringing this youth aspect to it. They connected us with a group called Fundación Ecominga in Ecuador, and that is where this project came about. So if you look here at this black arrow, that is exactly where we're located. It's directly on the Colombian border in northwest Ecuador, in a province called Carchi province. It's near El Chical, which is a very small town, a beautiful town. And this is it. So from the top right here, that is the Pylon River, and that is the bottom edge of our site. So it starts at about 900 meters, and in the bottom right here, that's the top edge of our site. These are Peñas Blancas, which means white rocks. That's what this area is called, and that is our site edge. So when we visit this place, we have to hike up this under the clouds right now. We have to hike up that, and it takes about 5 hours to go a single mile, but it's incredibly worth it because of what's inside. So our priority for this youth-led biodiversity conservation is to conserve biodiversity hotspots. I'm not sure if everyone on here has heard of 30 by 30, which is this idea that we need to conserve at least 30% of our planet by 2030 in order to maintain a habitable planet for us. Well, we need to conserve the right 30% of our planet, and that's what our focus is. It's finding these areas that are incredibly biodiverse, have tons of species living there, and that are also incredibly threatened. And so we can step in and prevent biodiversity loss more easily. These are the animals that live, plants and animals that live on this site. This one, this angry looking toad in the top left, is an endangered species called Raibocolami that was previously thought extinct for about 30 years. This species here in the lower right, it's called Atelopus coine. It's critically endangered. It's one of the most endangered toads in all of Ecuador. And it's just about the size of half of your thumb. It's very small, but when we go on expeditions, we're looking for these animals to monitor them, check their health, and see if these populations are growing, shrinking, if they're affected by climate change or disease. We also have ocelot, club-winged manakin, cock of the rock, even new species of orchids like this. This is a Dracula orchid, and that's the namesake of this reserve. It's called Dracula Reserve. And then most importantly, we have this critically endangered species of brown-headed spider monkey. And it's not that it's more important necessarily inherently than any of the other species, but as sort of a top of the food chain kind of animal, it has a huge role in preserving these forests. They spread seeds, and they help make sure that this forest is resilient. And this species is down to hundreds, maybe a few thousand individuals left in the world. So we're very proud to have this location that is so incredibly biodiverse. But of course, without these people, and without the work that they put in to protect these forests, buying the land, funding the purchase of the land doesn't really do anything. Sorry about my dog barking in the background. It's really down to these protectors. These are the forest rangers. They're employed by our local partner, Fundación Ecominga. Hector, Nilo, Milton, Giovanni, David, Rolando. These people are on the ground every single day, patrolling the forest, making sure that no one is poaching orchids, making sure that nobody is hunting. There's a lot of hunting of the critically endangered monkeys. And then they're also working with the community to ensure that everyone understands the benefits of conservation and the reasons why it's important to preserve this forest, to prevent landslides and to prevent climate change and the degradation of the water supply for the community. So when we fundraise for these reserves, we're not just fundraising to help this in-country organization buy land. We're also fundraising to make sure that they can support that land with the protection it needs through hiring local and indigenous protectors, forest rangers. But I also want to bring our attention back to our organization, to Reserva, because we are protectors of a different sort. So this is our youth council, and we've actually never taken a full group photo. So there's a lot of cameras off. This was our first attempt, but we meet every month. It's a group of about 60 people from 16 countries, and they're from Pakistan, Ecuador, the US, the UK, all over the place. And we meet monthly to discuss our objectives with fundraising and conservation education and storytelling, but also to update each other on our work in committees. So I'll get into committees a little bit later as I talk about the structure of the organization, but essentially this is the group that's really been leading this fundraising initiative and helping to design the organization from scratch. We met as a group, probably about 15 of us, before this organization even had a name. So this is really, when we say youth-led biodiversity conservation, we're talking about these are the people who are leading this organization, like point blank. So a little bit more about what we do. I'm just going to kind of breeze through this, but when I talk about education, there are two facets to this. So there's a global approach to education that we take, which is trying to educate people around science and the importance of conservation. And one of the ways that we do that is through engaging them in really cool and creative projects that help illustrate the fact that we have so much left to protect on this planet, and there are things left to discover if we can just act quickly enough to conserve this habitat. So this is one example, and this was super fun. I don't know if anyone out there watching was part of this competition, but we are lucky enough to work with a group of scientists from the National Institute of Biodiversity in Quito. And in 2017, they discovered a new species of torrent frog. It's a type of tree frog, or similar to a tree frog. And by 2019, they had worked up enough evidence to prove that this was a new species. And so they offered us the chance to name it. This is a frog that happens to be the most populous frog on our site. And so they offered us the chance to name it. It's an honor that's usually reserved for the scientist, and it's often named in honor of a major donor or even auctioned off to the highest bidder. And we thought, you know what? Kids and young people never really get the chance to participate in something like this. So we opened it up to the entire world, and we just advertised it through Instagram. So if you didn't hear about it, that's probably why. Please go follow us. We need to grow our following. But we asked people to read about this frog's physical characteristics, about the habitat where it lives, about the people who live there, and then offer a scientific and an English or Spanish name that fits this frog and maybe spreads a message. And so we got 622 unique entries from 36 countries. And ultimately, we went through many rounds of review and then a final round of judging with some incredible judges from around the world, and decided on Hilocyrtus conscientia. Conscientia meaning consciousness for the planet. And that's a name submitted by a 19-year-old in Ecuador named Carolina Bustillos. And that name, as well as this entire list of submissions, has now been submitted for publication in Science. So this wasn't exactly a education like you're used to in school, but more of an idea of educating youth and young people about the scientific process and kind of changing the game for how we engage young people in science. And then locally, we think it's really important to take a community-based approach to conservation, and that involves education as well. So the lower left picture here is a biodiversity exhibit that brought about 100 museums from the museum in Quito to this rural town, El Chical, that's nearest our site. Nothing like this had ever come to this area before. If you wanted to see specimens of animals, you had to go really far away, drive about 6 or 7 hours to the city to be able to see what lives in your backyard up close. And so we supported this biodiversity exhibit, and 1,200 students from Colombia and Ecuador were able to come and see a howler monkey up close, see little deer and Andean foxes and all the biodiversity that's in their backyard, finally see it up close and begin to understand what lives directly in their backyard. And then when we're on expedition, this picture on the right, Natalia is one of our youth council members and a recent member of our expedition. And we're able to interact with local people, especially Camila here, who lives with us when we're at the place where we stay, or kind of our home base there, and teach them things just on the fly. So this was a snake that we were lucky enough to come across on expedition. And there's a huge local fear of snakes because for good reason. There lots of venomous snakes, and a lot of people have died from snake encounters. So, but unfortunately, that has a detrimental impact on the biodiversity there, because when people see a snake, their immediate assumption is, I can't identify it, I need to kill it just to protect myself. Totally fair. But there are a lot of easy ways that we can teach people not to fear certain types of easily identifiable snakes. And so that kind of work is really important when we're there on the ground. So that's a brief overview, and I'm sure I'm probably like way late on time here, but that's a brief overview of what we do. And now I'm just going to kind of peel back the curtain and show you a little bit of how we got where we are, and some of the nitty gritty. So if the nitty gritty doesn't interest you, I apologize, because that's what I'm getting into here. So when we started this organization, we had to think first about, is it worth starting an organization? That is actually a really important question that I think a lot of people don't consider before they jump into something. First, you have to identify a problem. For me, the problem was there are a lot of young people out there who don't feel that they have a way to directly impact conservation, a direct way to use their voice for change. There's a lot of people protesting, but they don't see that protest have immediate action. And that can be really harmful psychologically, to feel like you're speaking and speaking and speaking and nothing is happening. And so I thought there's a problem here, that conservation organizations are not reaching this huge group of young people who care so much about the planet. That's the problem. So my solution is to bridge that gap between tried and true methods of biodiversity conservation and this huge group of youth who want to help. So then you have to ask yourself, is anyone already doing this? Is there a group that is doing exactly what you want to do? It might be that someone is, but they're not doing it where you are, if it's a local organization. And my answer was no. I don't see any organization that's working internationally that's letting youth be in charge and taking a direct impact on biodiversity conservation. If someone is doing it, trust me, it is easier and more impactful to just support that organization. It takes a lot of work to start something. So if you can support an existing organization, that is probably the way to go. But if not, you need to start something new. So then you have to ask yourself, okay, am I ready to do this full time? Am I ready to have no salary for a year or two? Are you comfortable with administrative work? It is so much paperwork to start an organization, to run a nonprofit. I am buried. It's probably half of my job. And I think you'll hear a little bit more about that on the panel. And so if the answer is no, I really just want to kind of do the work that I want, the solution, I just want to work on that, then I would suggest in the US, it's called an LLC. Just start a basic business, just, have some articles of organization, and then you'll at least be legally recognized. And then you have to ask yourself, do you need to be able to accept donations? If yes, then in the US, and this may be similar in other countries, you can set something up called a fiscal sponsorship, which means that you can go to an existing organization, a nonprofit that can already accept donations, and say, hey, I think I help fulfill your mission. Would you be willing to grant me any funds that I raise through you? And if you say yes, that's your fiscal sponsor, and you are golden. So when we started, we wanted to get started really quickly. It takes a long time to start a charity. So we actually started with a fiscal sponsorship. And so for the first year and a half, we were accepting donations, not directly, but through an existing charitable organization. And then if you are really ready to dive in, just make sure. And then there's a very long process to starting a nonprofit. So that's the little thinking flow chart that I recommend. Once you actually start an organization, you have to do a little bit of paperwork of thinking, just kind of some legwork, thinking, what is my vision for this organization? What do I want to see happen in the world? And then what's my mission to make that happen? So this is our mission statement. Reserva empowers young people to make a measurable difference for threatened species and habitats through conservation, education, and storytelling. Once you write your mission, you should never go outside of it. And in fact, legally, we are bound to it. So when we file for charitable status in the US, we have to tell the US government, you shouldn't tax anything we do because we are fulfilling this charitable mission. And so if we suddenly start doing something that's outside of it, the US government can come and say, no, that's not under your mission. We're taxing that. So your mission statement's incredibly important. And it just wouldn't be a good presentation about Reserva if I didn't bring in our partner, Javier. He is the reserve manager in Ecominga. And the amazing thing about Javier is that under no obligation by contract or even verbal obligation, he simply embraced our mission and has started to incorporate it into Dracula Reserve. So we have young people who are guards. We have young people who are now managing their media and communications. They are trying everything they can to engage youth within their organization. And in fact, just this year, they've nominated 2 youth board members to their board of directors. And he said this quote that I love: "We cannot spread a message that we don't practice. We can't spread something that we don't really believe. I have a lot of trust in young generations. We can't go to big meetings and say that we want to involve young people if we don't give them the chance." So he recognizes that, if you're young, you're probably going to make some mistakes, but you have to give people the chance to start growing into these positions of change and of power. So we really embrace that ethos in the work that we do. And so I'm just going to, again, dive into a chart here that will explain kind of how we think about our mission in terms of the programs we create. And then I'll get into our governance in a second. So this is our flow chart. So you probably recognize that we love charts already, but this is how we work. So we've got a board of directors that controls the organization. They have to vote to make sure, hey, you're not getting out of your organizational mission. So the board of directors makes final decisions, but really the organization is run by executive director, which is me, and the youth council, which is all 60 people from around the world. And then everything we do, we design into these mission impact areas. And that's to make sure that we don't stray outside and have what's called mission drift. So we have these conservation, education, and storytelling impact areas. And then we have goals that we've written out, and we make sure that everything we do is both within our mission and helps to achieve our goals, creating youth-funded reserves that protect biodiversity, of empowering young people. If we're just conserving land, but young people aren't involved, that's no good for us. It has to help achieve those goals. And then targeting events like the IUCN, where we are here, like the UNCBD or UNFCCC, and making sure that we're amplifying the work that we've done on the ground to the world stage. So in charge of that organization is the board of directors. So this is our initial board. We just started as a nonprofit this year. So we put into our bylaws, which is this governing document, it's very important, that reservist board must always include 30 to 50% youth members. We defined youth as 26 and under, but because of some legal stuff in the US, we have to have 18 to 26 on our board. And that just means that for people who are considering donating a large amount to fund our operations, they'll see, okay, it's not all people who have never governed an organization before. So, 50% are going to be people who, might have a little bit more experience, but that there's still control, voting power by young people on this board now and 100 years from now. Take a screenshot. If you are starting an organization and you want it to be youth-led, take a screenshot of this slide, because legal language is kind of annoying, and our attorney was kind of baffled by this request that I made to add this into our bylaws. So this is the language we put in to make that stipulation. And then, of course, the youth council, which I already showed you this slide, but they are so important. So we took this council of 60 people, and when we started, we really, we were kind of disorganized. We just met as a group and we tried to share ideas, but it really only started working when we broke up into committees. So this group is now divided into these 5 main committees, as well as a junior committee for the younger kids who maybe have to have their parents help to engage them in meetings and stuff. And these committees are led by officers, and each officer is in charge of making sure that their committee achieves some part of reserve's mission and goals. So we are global, and we have some English only and some Spanish only speakers, but we have enough people who are capable of translating that we're able to have meetings that are kind of dual English and Spanish to make it a little bit more inclusive. We're hoping that, in future we'll be able to be even more inclusive than that, but that's where we are right now. So that is a brief run through, and I know I'm probably a little over time, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them right now.
Thank you very much, Callie. Yeah, I wasn't going to cut you off as the boss. I'll let you keep going.
Sorry.
Just waiting to see if there's any coming up in the chat, but if not, also feel free just to. There's a question: how can youth contribute in biodiversity? I think over the next 2 sessions we'll find out a lot about that.
Yeah, James is going to go deep dive into fundraising and how we do it, so we'll get a lot on that. And then plans to do an ichthyological survey. Yes, absolutely. The freshwater fish have never been studied, and in fact in this particular reserve, of course they've been studied in Ecuador, but that is something that's coming up for us. On our last expedition, we were able to we caught one catfish. We don't know what species it was, but the Andean catfish, which we know that this is within that same genus, is critically endangered. So this area probably holds a lot of important freshwater biodiversity. Hoping that we can engage a young ichthyologist when we do that. Carla, yeah, I hope you can make it. And for those who are asking, how can I be part of this team? Just reach out to me on Instagram, shoot me a message, or info@reserveaYLT.org. That slide will be up later. And happy to try to involve you. Of course, this is a platform for everyone. So even if you're not part of the youth council and dedicating hours per week to doing this, we need your help desperately. And we'll get more into how you can do that later. I just realized, Joe, I didn't go much into the Million Letters campaign actually at all. I accidentally deleted that slide. So James is going to talk a little bit about that, but we do have a campaign that no matter where you are in the world, no matter if you have access to money, to a donor network, to even a credit card so you can fundraise, that does not matter. We have a campaign that you can participate in called the 1 Million Letters campaign. And basically it will ask you to write a letter saying what you love about nature and explaining why we need to protect critical habitat for endangered species and our wild places before it's too late. When you write that letter and send it to us, we'll match it with $3 toward our youth-funded reserve in Ecuador. And in fact, we're really lucky to be joined by KM Reyes from Center for Sustainability Philippines, who's one of our partners in the Philippines. And if you are Filipino and you are based in the Philippines and write a letter, send it to them, they have a partner who will match it with $3 toward their projects as well. So double the impact if you're based in the Philippines. Okay.
Yeah, just one last one, I think, before we move on to James. Sarah Daldos asking, how are local stakeholders situated in the organization structure? I think that
that's a great question. So we recognize that as a global organization, as youth who are mostly just meeting on Zoom, we are not the right organization to be actively involved organizing local community events. So we rely very heavily on our in-country partner to be that organization. It doesn't really make sense for us to reinvent the wheel locally. We are reinventing the wheel for how we fundraise for things, but there is an organization that already exists that engages local stakeholders very well. And so we support them in the initiatives that they've designed. And then we help think up additional initiatives that they can implement. So the Million Letters campaign is something that they've brought to the local community. And it's actually been incredibly helpful to engage local governments. And they've won support from the local community and nearby governments who have seen this campaign and really thought, this is a great way to engage young people. And so because of this campaign, they've actually been able to make really important connections, both with community members and governments, so all kinds of local stakeholders. So we support them in that way, but we really rely on our in-country partner to do that work. So
great.
Right,
I think we will move on to our next section, but as we mentioned at the beginning, feel free just to keep dropping questions in the chat. I'm sure Callie will be around to pick them up if she can. And also we do have quite a few, 1 or 2 members of our youth council. I'm seeing names here, so they may be able to answer some questions as well. So just drop them in the chat, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of time in the mid-session activity that you can ask questions as well.
Sorry for running long.
It's all right. Just before we move on to James, you've been hearing a lot about Javier.
Oh, Joe, you're muted.
I just muted myself. I don't know how that happened. He's an incredible individual. I really wish he could have joined us in person. We definitely wouldn't be on time if Javier was here, but he is, if you want to know anything about the birds of Colombia and Ecuador, he is the man to go to for that information. He's just recorded a very short video for us to send, and hopefully that will start playing once I just start sharing my screen. Do let me know, Callie, if there's any problems with audio or video once I've started.
Is Javier Roballo. I'm working in Ecominga Foundation, and I'm in charge of the Reserva project and Dracula Reserve. One of the new projects that we have is to involve young people, considering that the next generation needs to be involved from the very beginning of projects to have a long-term impact. We cannot transmit ideas and knowledge and concepts if we are working alone. We need to work with all the different partners that we have, and young people, it's in a different stage. They are not waiting, they are taking actions, and this is the moment, and this is a place to have young people that wants to be scientists, young people that wants to make their own effort, people that wants that her voice must to be felt outside. We cannot go to big meetings and say that we want to involve young people if we don't give the chance. Now is the moment. We don't have time to make mistakes, and young people will provide us 20 years more of actions. And next generation need to be in charge to the next generation also. That's the moment.
I don't know that I can handle anymore.
I hope that all played correctly, because it's hard not to get a little bit choked up whilst you're listening to that. And I've seen it several times, and every time I watch it, I still feel a bit, oh, that's powerful. So also on our website, if you want to watch it in full HD, it's also on our website as well, just in case. But it's Javier has a way with words, and it was really well put, the difference that young people can really make to conservation around the world. And so next we're going to hear from another young person, if you will bear with me. We're going to hear next from James Miller, who I believe is here waiting. He's not on my screen at the minute, but he has been. There he is. James is a 19-year-old environmentalist and filmmaker studying natural sciences. Since he was 13, he's been making short films about climate and biodiversity issues in the hope of inspiring more people in his generation to step up and take action. He's also heavily involved in campaigning, which has taken him everywhere from atop park benches in London to the inside of 10 Downing Street in an effort to put climate and biodiversity higher up the political agenda. In 2021, he's focusing his efforts on leading a project to mobilise young people in the UK ahead of COP26. And I believe James is going to be talking a bit more about the financial power of youth and how we can, young people can directly contribute to conservation. So James, I'm going to hand over to you, and hopefully you'll be able to share your screen.
Hello, yeah, I'll try doing that right now. wasn't aware I was going to have to follow on from Javier. No one wants to follow on from Javier because we'll all be outshined by him. Let me get this up, see if I can make it full screen. There we go. So yeah, I'm essentially going to be following on from Callie's presentation and taking a bit of a deeper dive into the youth fundraising that we do at Reserva, and how all the people on our youth council and other people have been supporting us to create this world's first fully youth-funded nature reserve in Ecuador. But I think before I go into that, it's useful to set out what precisely we mean by youth fundraising in this context. Reserva only accepts donations towards its reserve that have been raised by young people. But what does that actually mean? Well, there are several different means of donating that fit within our definition. The first, I think, is the most obvious one, and that's donations directly from young people. And that can be young people, children who have pocket money, but also our definition of youth goes right up to the age of 26 in terms of who we accept donations from. So that encompasses teenagers who might have weekend jobs, or even, fully fledged adults who might have their own salaries. We also accept donations from older people as well, and that can be in honor, memory, or as a gift to a young person. And that's a huge component of what we get as well. But there's also general donations that we can accept from older people, which can help cover the running costs of our organization. And if you're someone that's over the age of 26, that's actually a way in which you can particularly support us as well, because that's a really important component of running an organization is the administrative costs, and it's a lot harder to raise that money, as Callie knows well. So that's a really important part of it. Donations that result from fundraising efforts of a young person. This is something I'm going to dive in particularly deep in this presentation, and you're going to hear a lot more about that later. Grants or sponsorships won by young people. Again, this is something that we have young people working on our team, and it's another important part of our income. And this can help to cover aspects of our running that aren't necessarily just the on the ground conservation, but also the admin costs and matching funds as well. We have a partner in the Rainforest Trust that matches all the donations we get from young people at the moment, which is really brilliant because any impact that young people have through their donations is doubled, which goes a long way. And also there's matching funds in terms of the Million Letters campaign, which I'm going to speak about as well a bit later. So I'm going to start with a little tour of some of the different ways that young people on our team have been doing fundraising towards the reserve. And I'm going to start with some of the individual fundraisers that we've done. And I think this is probably the most accessible form of fundraiser because you don't need a big team to do it. The initiatives aren't always very complicated, and you don't need a lot of time and effort invested to get them up and running. And I guess the first of these is the Facebook fundraiser. That's probably one of the most simple things you can do to raise money. I'm really technologically incompetent, and I managed to do it in about 2 minutes. So I'm sure any of you will be capable. And that can have a huge impact, actually, as you can see in Callie's fundraiser that I took a little screenshot of to put on this slide. It can have as much of an impact as some of our group fundraising efforts as well. Cake sales and lemonade stands are classics for fundraising, and we've employed them to great use for us, but also I'd like to mention someone called Ian on our team who's done an interesting take on this, which is he's selling plants and tree saplings instead of cakes. And that's having a kind of, I guess, a multifaceted impact in that it's both conserving this rainforest through the donations he gets, but he's also giving out trees to his local community and encouraging people to plant them. So that's having twice the impact. And that was a really inspired idea, I think. And finally, you may recognize the chap on the right here. Callie's already shown you this picture, but this is Joe, who's facilitating our session. And when he's not on a Zoom talking to all of you guys, he's running an ultra marathon, 45 miles to raise money for our reserve. And he raised a lot of money through that and had a really incredible impact. And that actually inspired our very first group fundraising effort that I want to talk to you about today. which is Run for the Rainforest. And essentially what we did is we took Joe's idea and we expanded it to make a global challenge where young people will pay an entry fee, a little donation, and then they can run either in our virtual charity 5-kilometer race or a 1-mile dash. And we had so many participants all around the world, 164 participants from more than 10 different countries, including again the US, the UK, Ecuador, Malawi, so many different places. And we reached all of these people through social media, by the way. This is the main way in which we share our work, especially across Instagram to engage younger generations, mainly through sharing through friends and through existing networks that we have. And we raised through that initiative $2,460 for conservation, all of which was matched by our partners in the Rainforest Trust, which is really brilliant. And we also incentivized participation through having a competitive element. We announced the fastest winners on our Instagram, the fastest runners in each category. And we also had a category, this one here, which is the category for people whose running tracks looks most like a jellyfish. And we did this by tracking people on Strava. They could, or any other running app, they could track and send us a screenshot of their times and their route. We didn't announce the jellyfish competition beforehand, but we thought it made a nice addition. This was probably the way in which I've personally contributed most to the fundraising effort. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about this perhaps. This is the concept for conservation. Last year, I was in the process of organising an in-person series of talks to raise money for Reserva, and then COVID came along and it was cancelled, it was postponed for the foreseeable future, as everything has been, and it still is postponed for the foreseeable future. But I thought it would be a good idea to run an online alternative to that event and to make it a concert, because I know it's a lot harder to hold people's attention online with talks. If you're all still listening to me, well done, you're doing a great job. But also I know that there are so many artists, really talented musicians all around the world who care about this stuff, who really care about conservation and about climate change, but who don't know how they can use their talents to make an actual difference on the ground. And we thought that, again, by offering them this opportunity, we might be able to facilitate that. And so I penned an email to this BBC Radio 1 DJ, maybe a bit naively, asking if he wanted to host it. And he said yes. And so from there, we gathered a whole team of young people at Reserva with so many different skills in graphic design. Emailing was the most important skill, I think, in this one. We went on several email marathons, contacted so many people, and so many of them said yes. I think in the end, we were partnered with UN Biodiversity to launch this event on the International Day for Biological Diversity. We were partnered with the Rainforest Trust again, and we had a lineup of Emmy Award-winning musicians and YouTube pop stars and National Geographic explorers. It was amazing. It was really beyond anything that we expected. And unfortunately, our DJ had to drop out in the end because he was really busy, but the wonderful Lizzie Daly, who I'm sure many of you will know, stepped in and did an amazing job. And in the end, that event raised more than $1,000 towards our reserve. And it was so much fun that we decided to put on another one a month later, which raised another $1,200 and also featured Olivia Rodrigo, who you might be able to spot here in the bottom right corner. She's become a bit of a big thing recently. That's that for the concept for conservation, but continuing on that theme of online events, Izzy Warren, who you'll be hearing from a bit more later, came up with this idea to have an online quiz, which was centered around the theme of wildlife. And again, we promoted this over social media, and we got loads of people on a Zoom call, as everything has been in the last few months, with a little PowerPoint presentation for the questions, and also a guest host, Natalie Bolt, who's an actress in Riverdale, if any of you know that series, which again helped us to promote the event to some more people. And through this, well, it was a really fun event, firstly. I think I did embarrassingly badly, but other than that, it was really brilliant. we managed to educate a lot of people through it as well. But it raised in the end about $500 in registration fees. So again, really helped to contribute towards our reserve. Next up is another individual effort actually, and I think this is a really good example of someone on our youth council who's really creatively employed his personal skills and talents towards making money towards the reserve. This is James McCulloch. He is an amazing guy in terms of identification. He's great at identifying species. I think his UK species list is at something like 3,900 species that he's managed to identify, which is really, really impressive. But how do you actually turn that into a profitable enterprise? I don't know that I'd be able to think of a way, but he did. He's offered his services to his neighbours, and he's basically said that he'll go around to their gardens, see if he can count as many different species as possible, tally them up, and in return for that service, they'll give him a donation towards the reserve. And he's done this with several people. He's been round, I think he got between 100 and 200 species in each garden, which again is very impressive. I don't know that I've seen that many species in my garden in my whole life. And he's raised about £160 towards our reserve. So again, I thought that was really clever. Now that's, I think, the end of some of the projects that young people on our team have been doing. But I thought that business, although it's not been one of our major areas of focus, it's another area that's growing, I think, for Reserva in terms of our income, and it's something that's worth mentioning. We've partnered up with this business called Paragraph Publishing. They've given us some money towards our projects, and again, that was won by a young person. That's the key theme, by the way, running through all of this, that all of the money that we raise towards our reserve, it couldn't have come in, it wouldn't have been donated towards our reserve were it not for the young person. They are the key component in mobilizing these funds, right? And now that's just the same here. That donation from that publishing company would not have been won without that young person on our team who got it for us, which is brilliant. But also there's this company, Project Happy Studios is what they're called, but they've started this charitable wing called Project Happy. And they are actually a youth-led business. They were set up by some of my friends from school last year in their gap year. And it's basically, it's like a mix between a talent agency and a marketing agency. They act to partner up people who are TikTok influencers with businesses that want to use those influencers to promote their products. And they take a share of the profits from that. And I got a phone call a couple of months ago from one of my friends who founded this company saying that they wanted to set up this charitable part of their work, and that they were looking in particular to support conservation charities. And I thought, I know the perfect organization, because I thought it was such a good match for Reserva, having this entirely youth-led business joining this fight to protect the last wild places on our planet. So that really made me happy, actually, to be able to involve some of my school friends in this project as well, who might not otherwise have got involved in conservation at all. Now, Callie's mentioned the Million Letters campaign. Here it is again. Here's some of the examples of letters we've had from it, which are beautiful. I think the illustrations are just as good as the words, personally. So essentially, a young person writes a letter to their government, to their politicians, explaining why nature is important to them and why they think it should be protected. And what we do is we then match that with funds from an external donor with enough money to protect a classroom-sized area of rainforest. And that both empowers young people who don't already have maybe an income stream and might not be able to donate to the reserve themselves, but it also has this other aspect to it, in that we can then use those letters for storytelling and to make an impact in international discussions. Hopefully, we're hoping to bring some of these letters and these messages to international UN summits, which would be amazing. So, having been through all of these different ways in which young people are contributing towards our reserve and towards fundraising efforts, are there any general themes that we can bring together? Are there any ways in which young people can be particularly effective in generating funds for conservation. And why is this an important area to develop, I think, for environmental and social good in general? Well, I think the first thing is that we are an incredibly environmentally conscious generation as a whole, more so than previous ones. And that's manifesting itself in political priorities, in consumer decisions, in lifestyle choices. But if we fail to empower young people to realize their financial power as well, and to inspire them to use that power to make a difference in terms of on-the-ground conservation, then we are completely neglecting one of the largest demographics of people who is most likely to care about these issues. And that would be a real shame. Also, we have a powerful voice. We've learned this, especially in the last few years, with the likes of Greta and the school strikers. And by the way, we've got some amazing young storytellers in our next session tomorrow, who you can hear more about this from. But we can use that voice to gain attention and to mobilize funds towards these projects where otherwise people wouldn't have heard about them, or whether people wouldn't have been moved to consider them important enough to be donating towards. So that's another important aspect. The third thing, I think, is that we bring new ways of thinking. I think diversity is really important in any situation where you want to get new ideas and new views. And that's no different for youth fundraising. I think there's also the fact that we can take more risks as well. I'm not employed by Reserva. I don't have a professional reputation to hold down either. If I run with something and it doesn't take off, or I suggest something that's a bit wacky or naive, then nobody really cares. And that's, I think, a real privilege of being able to work with such a small youth-led organization, is that you can afford to deviate a bit more from maybe accepted wisdom or the same tracks that conservation organizations have been running down for so many years. And the last thing is that we have a real expertise in social media, a lot of us, as a generation as a whole. That's probably how most of you heard about this conference in the first place, actually. It's certainly how I did. And it's how I joined Reserva. And we can exploit that unparalleled level of interconnectedness to reach so many more potential donors than people would have otherwise been able to before the advent of social media. And young people could be particularly helpful in that respect. So I think I'm coming to the end of what I wanted to say. And I think what we've learned as a whole through this conference, which isn't over yet, but I think we've learned that young people really have a voice that's worth listening to when it comes to conservation. But what I hope you've learned through this presentation in particular is that we also have an immense potential when it comes to our financial power as well. And that's really an area that's worth developing if we want to take action to protect wild spaces today. And there are so many people, young people, all the way around who are getting their heads down and protecting these last wild spaces, not waiting for politicians to take action to do what they should have done decades ago. And that's something that really gives me hope, and I hope gives all of you hope as well. Before I go, I am about to stop talking, but before I go, I should give a little shout out to Run for the Rainforest 2. We're doing a second one because we enjoyed the first one so much. And that's happening between late April and May. It's basically, I think, the same in its format. You pay a donation fee to enter and participate in one of our runs. And now all of you guys are wise to our jellyfish competition, so you can be strategic about how you go about running as well from that perspective. We're really creeping up to our fundraising target now. I think we're only about $27,000 off. And we're really hoping that through this, we might be able to near that target or maybe even surpass it. So if you want to support us, this would be a really good way to do that, both through donating, but also through sharing this and reaching so many more people. Right, I think this is just a little summary slide of some of the ways in which you can support us if you've been inspired by this today and you also want to contribute to this reserve, this world's first fully youth-funded nature reserve. These are some ways that you can help us. The first is by contributing towards the fundraising, as all the young people in this presentation have done. And All of that money that you raise will go directly towards our reserve in Ecuador, towards protecting the land and paying the salaries of those guards who protect it as well. Also, we would love to have some of you contribute to our Million Letters campaign. We're trying to gather letters from all around the world, from people in all different countries, telling their politicians why they think nature should be protected. And that money, those letters will be matched with money to protect our rainforest reserve, but also we're hoping to get them in front of decision makers and to people where it will have a real impact and your messages will be heard. Also, please do follow us on social media. Everyone who follows us, that gives us the potential to have a multiplied impact and to reach more young people, which would be amazing. You can also check out our website. Maybe, Joe, it would be good to put some of these links in the chat so people can investigate. But we've got all sorts on our website, including expedition field notes from our last expedition, so you can see what's been seen on our site and precisely what it is that we're protecting. And finally, yeah, the Run for the Rainforest again. It's a brilliant opportunity to help us out and to get a bit fitter. I know after lockdown, I certainly need to. There we go. I think that's it for me. But if anyone has any questions, I'll be very happy to take them. I may have to delegate some to Callie. Yes, fire away if there are any.
Great, thank you, James, for that presentation. Just before any questions do come in, I hope you're all feeling a little bit more empowered about the financial power that young people can actually have. We're running not late, but just a little bit close to schedule. So we have got a quick fun activity. So I may introduce that first, and then we'll take a little 5-minute break whilst people do the activity, and perhaps we can take some questions in the break as well then, whilst people sort of do the activity and ask questions, just whilst we prepare for the panel. So Shruti is very kindly sharing the link. We're going back to Padlet. I'll share my screen now that has the instructions on it, so everyone knows what's going on. Give me 1 second. Yes, Shruti is sharing all of those very kindly in there. Okay, for those who joined late, we are using a platform called Padlet. When you click the link that Shruti is sharing in the chat, you'll be taken to a world map. And if you were here earlier, you'll have already made a pin. And what you do is you can go to the pin, and if you find the one that you made, you can click edit point, and you can, what we want you to do is write a barrier to youth-led biodiversity conservation or youth environmental action more generally in your area. As a sort of starting point, we thought maybe some common themes would be issues around money, access to resources, lack of technology, perhaps the political environment of your area is not very helpful to conservation, to put it that way. Issues related to language and communication. So feel free just to go through and edit and put a comment about it, be as detailed as you want, because tomorrow we'll be revisiting this map to sort of brainstorm some potential solutions to these problems. And if you were late and you haven't created a pin, feel free to create a pin using the pink plus sign in the top right-hand corner. And yeah, that's our sort of mid-session whilst we just take a break in preparation for our panel, which will be coming up in just under 5 minutes. We've got 4 great guests, and I believe they've all arrived, but we'll save all the introductions for after that. And also, any questions you may have, now is a great opportunity to ask them, but hopefully Callie or James will be able to answer them. So I'm going to give my voice a rest and your ears a rest for 5 minutes whilst I mute myself. But yeah, please do this fun challenge, because it will really add to the session tomorrow about, you know, where we're trying to show how young people have got a passion, and then they can be also very creative problem solvers. So yeah, enjoy your little session and ask any questions now.
I'll actually take the mic here for a second. Thanks so much, James. That was an amazing presentation. And everyone who's just joined on, please go do the Padlet thing. It's actually going to be a really cool product at the end. And of course, with this IUCN Global Youth Summit, we're all helping to contribute to this outcome statement that's being presented to the IUCN World Congress. And this is helping us with that. So please do go fill it out. But I thought that as you're doing that, I'd go ahead and just verbally answer the questions that came in on the chat, which if you're watching, you may have seen from Raquel. we were talking about the importance of community-based conservation and local autonomy and indigenous rights. You may have seen online the hashtag #LandBack. It's really important. One of the most effective climate solutions is to give land back to indigenous people who should have control of their land that was stolen from them. They traditionally are more sustainable with their land management, and so that is a really important solution. So just to clarify about this particular reserve and the work that we plan to support through a network of these reserves around the world, when it comes down to specific conservation projects, the ones we support are pieces of land that are owned by an individual. So they're privately owned, and that person can do what they want with them. They can cut down the trees and plant naranjilla. They can cut down, slash and burn and for cattle pasture, as happens all over this particular area. So they can do what they want with it. And oftentimes, because of social inequality, those people are pressured into selling their land. They're pressured into by financial pressure. They can't afford to keep their land any longer, and so they have to sell. And or they are just kind of tired of living there. They want to move to the city, and so they decide to sell. And unfortunately, in these wild areas, in these biodiverse areas, there are mining companies and international corporations who are hoping to develop because it's cheap. And so in this area, our biggest threat is, aside from just deforestation from individuals who would want to have cattle and things like that, the biggest threat is gold mining companies. There's actually a gold mining company from Australia who is exploring for gold in this area. And unfortunately, they are there very vocally saying, you want to sell land, we'll buy it. And if they buy it and they find pay dirt, they are going to destroy that mountain. So not only does that destroy the ecosystem, but it also contaminates the water, has all kinds of downstream effects of that kind of work. So the work we support is when there is an individual who wants to sell their land they own personally, we support an in-country organization, in this case, an Ecuadorian organization, who comes in to purchase that land and put it into conservation and then employ local people to protect it. And so in this particular case, the person who is selling the land is actually now employed as a ranger. So it's kind of a win-win. And then there is an indigenous community. The Awa Indigenous Nation is, there's a territory directly adjacent to this site. They're literally our next door neighbors. And we're really proud to be partnered with Ecominga because they are deeply committed to ensuring that that relationship is strong. Previously, there's a lot of tension between neighboring people, neighboring organizations. And so they have supported that territory through COVID with food deliveries and support. And then they are trying to bring discussions around alternative livelihoods and the importance of conservation in this particular zone so that they can have a better relationship and support each other. So anyway, that's probably all the 5 minutes that we had to work on Padlet, but I thought I would just touch on that since I'm sure it was on a lot of people's minds. But thank you, Raquel, for the question.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Callie, for answering that. It's a very, very important issue that's coming up a lot around the world. So thank you for taking the time to answer it. We are going to move on to the panel discussion now, as just to keep us to time, because I don't want to take any more time away from our great panelists that we've got lined up. I'm just going to do a quick, I believe everybody is here. Yeah, sorry, we can introduce everybody. Didn't want to start the panel discussion and then we didn't have any panelists. So, yeah, it's, I'm really excited to move on to this panel discussion. When we were putting this together, this panel was very excited to see the panelists we can get. We're really honored to be joined by 4 incredible young people from around the world, including Elizabeth Watuti, who is a 25-year-old Kenyan climate activist, the founder of Green Generation Initiative, and head of campaigns for the Wangari Maathai Foundation. Liz's climate activism and environmental advocacy has received acclaim all over the world. Additionally, the Africa Youth Awards named Liz one of 2019's 100 most influential young Africans, and the 11-11-12 Foundation gave her the Africa Green Person of the Year award in 2019 as well. Next, we have Izzy Warren, who is a 17-year-old climate justice activist with the UK Student Climate Network and the Youth Strike for Climate movement, and is also a member of Reservists Youth Council, where she serves on the Conventions Committee with a particular focus on reservists' involvement in climate change discussions, such as the upcoming COP26 in Glasgow. Then we have KM Reyes, who is a conservation lobbyist, community organizer, and National Geographic explorer based on Palawan Island in the Philippines. She is the consultant, program director, and co-founder of the environmental non-government organization Center for Sustainability Philippines, which she co-founded together with a small group of local colleagues. Their mission is to conserve the Philippines' last remaining 3% of pristine rainforest through the legal establishment of national parks. And finally, we have Marina Melanidis, who is a Greek-British-Canadian settler on the unceded, unsurrendered territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, currently known as Vancouver, BC. She is the founder and co-managing director of Youth for Nature, a youth-led global non-profit mobilizing young people to lead on solutions to both the climate and ecological crises that are grounded in knowledge, community, and justice. And I'm just going to stop sharing my screen so you can all see the videos correctly. Thank you so much to our 4 panelists for joining. I'm really excited to hear what everybody has to say. And also what we're going to quickly do is ask each panelist to sort of introduce themselves a bit more, talk about their organizations and the reason that they founded or joined at a very early stage a youth-led organization. Then we're going to open to questions from the audience. So whilst they're presenting, please think about the questions that you'd like to ask. You have 4 of the greatest leaders of youth organizations in the world here. So we're really excited to have this. So Liz, could I ask you to start sort of just your experience, your organization, and why you decided that you needed a youth-led organization?
Thank you so much, Joe. It's a great honor to be part of this conversation today. My name is Elizabeth Wathuti. I'm an environmentalist and a climate activist from Kenya, and I'm also the founder of Green Generation Initiative. My experience has been one of a childhood where I got to grow up in nature and in the woods. And of course, this is what made me love nature and connect to nature at a young age. And I remember witnessing and being able to spend a lot of my time as a young girl out in the forests, close to clean streams that were flowing close to my home. And these are the things that made me develop this strong love for nature. And of course, along the way, I also felt heartbroken witnessing deforestation at first hand and going to places and finding streams flowing with what I like to call a soup of poison, flowing with plastic waste. And of course, these things made me angry. And I still recall being able to have an opportunity to plant my first tree at the age of 7. And to me, this was an opportunity to be able to co-create with nature at a young age. And of course, it made me discover that when you are so much connected to nature, you get to also feel the pain of nature caused by environmental degradation. And for me, I think this is where it all started, being able to have that strong connection with the natural world at a young age and being able to look at a problem in around my community or around my country and then see it as a challenge and then decide of what to do about that problem. So that is when I decided to also create a generation of environmentally conscious individuals. So I founded Green Generation Initiative to nurture more young people to love nature and to also be environmentally conscious at a young age, because this was all inspired by how I grew up and the fact that I could look at a stream, see the plastic waste and see how terrible it was looking, and then not decide to stop at the anger, but continue to find solutions on what I could do about it. So what I say is that being able to witness challenges that were harming nature and that were destroying my ecosystem around my home gave me really strong anger, because at times witnessing things like people throwing trash out of car windows, going to a place and finding your forest degraded and all the trees fell down, it's really something that was heartbreaking for me. And also it gave me so much anger. But then this anger did not stop at the anger, but it gave me a hunger to want to do something about these problems. And so that is the kind of generation I'm looking at when founding this initiative called Green Generation Initiative. And so I started with the campaign that I dubbed Adopt a Tree campaign. And for me, the vision was to inculcate a tree growing culture among the young people, because millions and billions of trees are being planted around the world. But the big question is, how many of these trees get to grow up to maturity? So when I was starting this program called the Adopt a Tree campaign, it was about making sure that people have a tree growing culture. And my vision was to make sure that the children also get to connect to nature at a young age through the symbol of a tree, through the tree. And of course, what we do through this program is to make sure that every child in every school in my country gets a chance to plant and adopt a tree in their school compound. And along the way, we also train them how to really connect to the natural world and train them how to look at problems and see solutions and then see themselves as the solution providers at the end of the day, regardless of what age they are. And the other aspect is that along the way, we discovered that the challenge of food insecurity was also affecting most of the children that we were working with in these schools. And you will agree with me that food insecurity is one of the greatest challenges that has faced and is facing the African continent as a result of the climate crisis. And so we decided to use these trees to also make sure that we are addressing food insecurity. And so we started establishing food forests, whereby we make sure that in every designated corner of the school, we plant mixed species of fruit trees. And what this means is that we were able to also make sure that we are increasing the forest cover in my country, and at the same time provide a nutritious source of food for these children to supplement their school's feeding program at the end of the day. And so we see this as a holistic approach whereby we are training the children. They are understanding about the challenges that the world is facing today. And they are not just getting angry, but they are stepping forward to be the solution providers. And also they are taking action from where they are. So I do believe in moving from anger to the hunger to want to do something about the challenges. And that is what this initiative is all founded about. So founding this initiative for me, I'm always inspired by the fact that we are raising a generation, because at the end of the day, it's about making sure that this planet is going to be left in a way that the next generations are not going to have to deal with so much of a problem and a mess like we are doing right now. So we are looking at a generation that puts people and our planet above profits, and a generation that is mindful of how they will leave this planet for all the other generations to come. So it's purely about changing people's mindsets. And every time I get children coming to me and telling me of the projects they've done in their communities after we went to their school and introduced this program. And every time I find young people who have finished high school and they've gone out to start projects in their communities, these are the impact stories that inspire me and make me feel really great about being able to found this organization. And of course, I don't work alone. I work with over 50 young volunteers who really help a lot in making sure that we are training these children out in the schools, and at the same time make sure that they are also getting inspired and getting nurtured to be the leaders, because it's not about saying that young people are the leaders of tomorrow, it's that young people are the leaders of today. And if we don't step up and take action on the challenges that we are facing today, then the biggest and the worst thing is that we will have to still live longer with the consequences of the inactions. So for me, this is what really inspires every aspect of this initiative. And we've been able to work with over 35 schools in Kenya right now. And at the same time, like I mentioned, being able to plant my first tree at the age of 7, and it did not stop at that. And I was also greatly inspired by Professor Wangari Maathai, who I draw a lot of my inspiration from her, because she was also fighting for nature, came from the same home region where I came from, and she was also really so much into restoration of nature. So we've been able to do over 30,000 tree seedlings and counting, and these seedlings have got a 98% survival rate as a result of this Adopt a Tree campaign. So my vision and my work right now is to make sure that we are focusing on nature regeneration, and also focusing on making sure that every ecosystem that is natural remains intact. Because it's really sad when I see young people in the schools that I work with, they're out there, they're planting trees, they're doing lots of great things for nature, but then we come to our cities and find the trees are being felled down. So it really it's sad when we see young people are stepping up, but on the other side of the world, things are in a mess. So I do believe that through such initiatives, then the world can have a kind of mindset where we are being mindful about how we live this planet for the next generations. And it's always something that inspires me a lot when I recall what Prof. Wangari Maathai always inspired us about being like a tiny little hummingbird. And it was about a story of a forest that was on fire, and all the animals were running to the other side of the forest, and of course, very angry that their forest was on fire. But this tiny little hummingbird decided that it was not going to just watch and do nothing. So it would pick a drop of water from the river and go try flying so many millions of times, but it still tried at the end of the day to do something about the fire. And there were big animals like the elephants on the other side of the forest, but they had huge trunks to be able to fetch liters of water, but they did nothing. So every time I think about the children that we're inspiring, over the 20,000 children that we're inspiring, I recall this story of the hummingbird, that it's also about doing the best that we can. You might be so much overwhelmed by the problems and the challenges of this world, but we cannot just fold our hands and say that our planet is going to get down to the drain. No, we have to all do the best that we can to make sure that we are leaving this planet in a better state for the next generations. It is overwhelming, of course, everyone is angry, but we can do the best that we can to make sure that we are saving the planet. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Callie has put the link to your website in the chat, so if anybody wants to follow up and look more into this work, it sounds really incredible. KM, why don't we come to you next? A little bit about your organization, a little bit about your experience and why you identified a need for a youth-led organization. And also, I'd just like to thank you so much for joining us at what I know is past midnight in the Philippines. So thank you so much for staying with us.
Yeah, I'm going to try and stay coherent. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us. And thank you to Reserva, obviously, for giving us this wonderful platform to share our stories. So really briefly, I am KM Reyes. I am co-founder of the Center for Sustainability, PH. We are a women-led youth environmental nonprofit from Palawan Island, known as the Philippines' last ecological frontier. So our mission is to conserve the Philippines' last remaining 3% of pristine rainforest through legal establishment of protected areas, which we achieve through community organizing, scientific research, and political lobbying. Our main pillars are land conservation, reforestation, and citizen science. And most importantly of all, our work comes from communities, is for communities, and goes to communities. So they really guide everything that we do. Up until now, our biggest achievements has been spearheading the legal establishment of the Cleopatra's Needle critical habitat. So it's actually the Philippines' biggest critical habitat. It measures 41,000 plus hectares. It's like 2.5 times the size of Washington, D.C. It takes like 4 days to get to the very top. And then also besides that, we've also done reforestation of the key livelihood species of our indigenous Batak community, reforesting the area with 15,000 plus seedlings, as well as doing trainings to deputize 39, including 24 of our indigenous peoples as rangers. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what we do very quickly at the Center for Sustainability. In terms of my own background, I'm a community organizer and political scientist and conservation lobbyist. So really the backbone of all of the work that I do and want to bring to the work that we do is policy change. I feel that it's very important that we're doing lots of things on the ground, that we're, doing lots of things through advocacy, whether that's through social media or educational outreach. But at the end of the day, if you don't have a policy to back what you're doing, then it doesn't have a real legacy. It doesn't have real legs to stand on. And that's the reason why, in terms of our reforestation and forest protection work, everything is backed by policy. And so lobbying is a huge part of the work that we do. And very briefly, the main reason why we decided to incorporate as an organization, for those of you who missed it, you've got to go back and check out Callie's wonderful presentation about what is establishing an organization, a nonprofit. It's really, really hard work, as Callie pointed out. But basically, the reason why we started as an informal group, and basically what happened is that as women and as youth, we come from a very remote part of the Philippines. We're far Western Philippines. And so we come from also a very provincial area. And so being a woman and also being youth basically makes us invisible for most decision makers. And so we basically decided to incorporate as an organization to give us a stronger voice, so that it's not just KM or Jessa or Solomon or Otaniel or Robert or Aubrey, who is my team, or a small team of 6 doing these really huge projects, but instead having an organization as a platform for us to push across what we want to change on our island. So yeah.
Great, thanks, Kim. I'm sure there'll be some questions coming in the chat for you, but thank you so much for joining us. And through the joy of Zoom, we're now moving from the Philippines over to pretty much across the world. Great to join by Marina from Youth for Nature. Marina, take it away. Same sort of answer to you. What's your own sort of background, but also why did you found Youth for Nature, and what sort of gap, I guess, did it fill, and what did you think was missing from global conservation?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much, Joe, and thanks everybody else. Hi, everyone. My name is Marina. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the founder and currently the co-managing director of Youth for Nature. And Joe sort of explained a little bit about what Youth for Nature is, and I don't want to take too much time like explaining like our reading out our mission statement, because you can just check that out online. But rather, I thought that I would talk a little bit about like the why, which is sort of what you were hinting at, Joe. Like, why do we exist? Why are we here? And what Youth for Nature is it's a youth-led international organization that's really working at that intersection of nature and climate. And I found, and a lot of my peers found, this gap really of work at that intersection that's really intentionally at that intersection, intentionally and specifically looking at both nature and climate, especially like coming from more of the climate space, which is sort of my background. I have a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resource Conservation, and currently pursuing a master's in forestry, but I have a lot of experience doing youth climate work. And I found that in the climate space, there weren't really a lot of people also talking about nature and biodiversity, despite the fact that these crises are really the same. You can't address one without the other. We need holistic intersectional approaches. Combine that with just a lack of platforms and resources for young people in general to showcase their work and to get more support to scale up. And seeing these like two gaps, and knowing that me kind of selfishly really wanted to work in both of these spaces. So I was trying to figure out how I could do that and how we could support other young people to work in these spaces too. And I didn't go into this planning to lead an organization. So maybe that's a bit of an unconventional start, but I was actually already leading a youth-led climate organization that was local to the city that I live in. So for Youth for Nature, we decided that it would be like an offshoot of this organization that we were already involved in. And it would just be like a one-off storytelling project. This was the plan. We wanted to go into storytelling because we know that there's so many young people all over the world that are doing incredible things already. What's really missing is a lack of access to platforms to showcase that work, and then a lack of access to resources to support that work even further and amplify it and create even more impact. So we wanted to start by looking at that. So we ran the storytelling campaign and collected stories of young people working for both nature and climate. It's a multilingual campaign. We received photos, videos, text-based stories, combinations. We received over 90 stories from 35 countries, which was super exciting for us because we were brand new and nobody knew who we were, and to be able to get that kind of reach was really exciting. And then we combined that storytelling campaign with a support for some of those storytellers to actually attend international events where they could then receive more support and receive even bigger audiences to help scale up their work even further. And we brought a storytelling delegation to the UN Youth Climate Summit in New York in 2019. It was a fully funded delegation as well, understanding that one of the primary barriers to attending events like these for young people is generally financial. And it really just snowballed from there. We received a lot of interest from a lot of other young people and a lot of interest from other non-youth allies as well, wanting to support our work. So we ended up becoming our own organization, and in 2020, successfully secured our first grant that enabled us to actually hire a global youth staff team. So why are we here? Like, what does Youth for Nature do? Well, externally, our mission is a by youth for youth organization that's working at the intersections of nature and climate, right? And that's global, that is catalyzing changes across borders while also implementing programs that are regionally specific. So we're not just doing advocacy and communication, although we are doing those things as well, because those things are incredibly important. But we're also amplifying young people that are doing work already on the ground and equipping them with tools they need to scale up, and also providing resources and skills and opportunities for young people who are not doing work on the ground right now, but want to, so that they can do that work. One of our sort of mantras is that like youth are not just advocates, we're not just cheerleaders, we're not just yelling on the streets, although we're doing those things too, and those things are important, but we're also like leaders right now on the ground and deserve to be leaders in all parts of the solution, from the decision making and the policy to the actual implementation on the ground. So that's sort of our external why, but then the internal one, and the one that's like a bit internal to myself as well, like why am I here individually? I want to build a place where young people can work for ourselves with other young people from around the world, where we can co-design our own futures and be paid for it. I'm very, very interested in compensating youth for our work, interested in providing financially supported opportunities for youth to work in nature and climate. And I'm interested in building an organization that lives our values and makes decisions horizontally and collaborates across borders and across languages as well, and supporting young people where they are with the tools that they need so that they can contribute to this space in their own communities and in their own contexts and in the ways that work best for them, and not be inhibited by barriers that are financial or barriers that are linguistic. And other barriers like that. Yeah. There's a lot of learning to do, and we're a relatively new organization. We only launched in 2019, but I'm really excited to be in this space. And I think there's so much work that we can do as young people when we're working together and when we have the actual support that we need to do that work.
Yeah, there's a lot of really great points in there. I think especially the one about compensating young people for their work. I'm sure there's a lot of supporters of that idea in here. Watching. And finally, just moving over to Izzy to quickly introduce your work, and sort of, I guess it makes sense to move from two very nature-based to one at the boundary of youth, nature and climate, to a very climate-orientated one with the UK Student Climate Network. So Izzy, maybe just briefly give us a little insight to what you do and the sort of, the background and that sort of thing.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Izzy and I'm a London-based climate activist. And I sort of got involved in the UK Student Climate Network, which is the organization that I'm a campaigner with, for the opposite reason that Elizabeth got involved in campaigning. For me, it wasn't that I had nature surrounding me. It came from a place of a lack of access to wild spaces and green spaces, and living in a very urban environment, having very sort of little connection to the outdoors beyond very small parks and stuff. And that was something that I saw reflected in a lot of my classmates and a lot of my friends who lived in similar places to me. And I'd known from a fairly young age that I wanted to be a conservationist, but I had no tangible ways to actually get involved in conservation living in a city like I did. And so up until getting involved in climate activism, my role in sort of wildlife conservation was very much sort of like Marina was saying, the cheerleader. It was, I can post up on social media and I can do fundraisers, but that didn't feel like enough. And so when the climate strikes started becoming a thing, I got very involved in that, because that was a tangible way that I could feel like I was impacting real change beyond just talking. It was a way to sort of harness youth power in places that oftentimes there weren't young people working towards things like sustainability and environmentalism, which was something that was really important to me. And mobilizing young people in urban areas is something that is really important to me, because I think it's a lot of people live in cities and we feel the same impacts of climate change. They're going to impact us here too. So I think that's something that's really important to work towards. So the organization that I'm a part of is a youth-led climate organization, and something that I think is really unique about the way that we work is our definition of youth. So I'm also a member of Reserva's Youth Council, and at Reserva we define youth as 26 and under, and the UN defines youth as like 35 and under. And within UKSCN, we define youth as 21 and under, which is something that's really important to me, because it means that we've created a space that is safe for young people, and young people who are very young. Some of our youngest volunteers, we've had an 8-year-old who was involved in the organization. And so creating those spaces where young people feel like they are in charge and they are in control, and there isn't the same barriers in terms of education and knowledge, I think one thing that I've definitely realized through getting involved in a lot of other organizations is the barriers that things like having gone to university can have in terms of being aware of what the solutions are. So creating a space for teenagers to work together has been really powerful. And we've had, I wouldn't say we've had a lot of success because our government's done very little on climate, but we've had what we would count as success. We've mobilized 350,000 people to take to the streets on one day in the climate strikes, which is the largest environmental protest in UK history. We are currently working on writing 2 pieces of legislation, which are the 2 first youth-written bills to ever go through the UK Parliament. And we've had engagement with a sort of wide range of stakeholders from our own communities and our local groups, all the way up to the leaders of all of the political parties here. So I think it sort of, for me, has been a learning curve, definitely, but it's shown me that young people have incredible power, and that people need to listen to us and take us seriously, and that we can find ways to harness political power without being able to vote, without having a lot of money. We still have that power, especially when we come together.
Great, thanks, Izzy. And having worked with you quite a bit with the Reserve Conventions Committee, I know a lot of the work you do is incredible, and just want to thank you for that before we move on. But we had a couple of questions come in through the chat. One, I guess, I'll go to Marina for this one because I know you have to leave slightly early, so we'll get the most of you before you have to leave. It's a question about what personal character trait has been your superpower in starting, running, or contributing to your organization? That is coming from the audience. So what would you say is your superpower that has helped?
Stubbornness might be my personal character trait that's superpower to do this. And false confidence. No, but seriously, like, a lot of the reason that we've been able to be as successful with Youth for Nature as we are right now is building like meaningful and reciprocal relationships with other team members that also want to do this. Like you can't do anything by yourself. Like young people, or you can do a lot by yourself, but you can't do as much by yourself as you could with other people. And it also won't be as fun as if you do it by yourself than it would be if you did it with other people. So being able to like recognize the skills that I don't have and the knowledge that I don't have, and then be able to build team relationships with people that do have that knowledge and that do have that skill has been absolutely invaluable. And then I say stubbornness and false confidence because unfortunately, like, young people aren't treated aren't automatically treated as if we do have like as if we do deserve to be in rooms and in spaces where decisions are being made. We're often treated as if we're not, or assumed that we don't know and that we can't help, even though we do and we can and we need to. So a lot of the time, in order to sort of get my foot in the door to introduce Youth for Nature and get Youth for Nature into a space, it requires a lot of me being able and my team being able to convince oftentimes adults why we deserve to be there. And that's like a hard thing to do, and we shouldn't have to do that, but that's the situation that I've been in many times. And that requires a lot of a lot of convincing other people why we deserve to be there and demonstrating why we deserve to be there as well. So doing the work anyway, and being able to use that as a demonstration of like our power and why it's important for young people to be in the room. And a lot of that also is helped by the support of team members, who's able to act as both like emotional and capacity support to be able to do that work.
Yeah, I wish we could ask everybody on the panel what their superpower would be. Feels like that should be a fun quiz that we could do as a follow-up after this. But some more that are coming in from the audience. We'll take this one first. KM, a lot of stuff going on in the chat as well is about how do you engage youth from sort of different backgrounds, of different interests and skill sets in your organization that you were founding, a links bit to what Marina was saying about identifying skill gaps, but I guess how do you create that sort of work atmosphere in a new organization that can bring those skills together? Kind of the logistical parts of it, I guess. How would you, first of all, how would you go about identifying those skills? How would you, for young people specifically?
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, like in our own direct experience, we were a small group, like specifically from here, from Palawan, that just had a very clear vision of what we wanted to do. So it was more, it's like a friendship, you know, you kind of just get to know each other and then figure out what your strengths are. We've been together, we just celebrated like 5 years, like last month. So many times. So I can't say that there's like a secret recipe. It's more just figuring it out as you go. I think the one thing that we all definitely like locked into really quickly was that we had a very specific goal. So we knew exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to protect this area, Cleopatra's Needle. And then we just kind of worked our way back of like trying to figure out what skills do we need to bring to the table in order to reach that goal. So it was more about kind of, harnessing and trying to discover, you know, because we were like very, you know, our youngest team member, Otaniel, he was like 16, and we were doing this like mega project with like countless politicians involved. And so it was us trying to figure out, you know, it's a bit like kung fu, like using like your weaknesses in a way to kind of either charm or beguile or, you know, on some level influence decision makers. But yeah, I think it's definitely figuring out your goal first and then working your way back. Yeah,
I think that was links to a lot to what Callie was saying earlier about, you know, having that goal set and that mission and not drifting from that mission. It makes it a lot easier. I don't want to say easy is possibly the wrong word, but it makes it a lot more achievable, we'll say. I don't think anything's easy in the conservation world at the moment, but I guess linked to that sort of, you know, how do you get skills and weaknesses and sort of different workloads? Izzy, I know this is something that you're quite passionate about from discussions, is about that creation of a sort of sustainable workplace that sort of takes account of young people having to go to uni, to school. I'd just like to hear your thoughts about that, as I know that's something we've chatted about before this, and I think it would be a great answer for the audience.
Yeah, I think like one thing that's really important is to recognize from the very beginning that we are not people who work at NGOs, we are not experts, and we don't have to pretend to be, because I feel like there is a lot of the time a pressure within youth organizations that we have to conform and we have to pretend to be something that we're not. And I think realizing from the very beginning, we're not going to go and pretend that we're Greenpeace. We're not going to go and pretend that we are WWF. Like, we don't need to be that. We can have influence and impact in completely different ways. And I think that's really important in creating a sort of sustainable work environment, is recognizing that like we are not, in a lot of instances, being paid to do this. We have other responsibilities and other things. And so I think creating an environment where we recognize like the value of our own work as individuals, but also being aware that if we take a step back, it's not going to be the end of the world. The movement's not going to collapse if we take a step back. And so empowering lots of young people so that one role can't only be done by one person, creating an environment where you teach young people, because that's really important. Like, constant education is really important, and making sure that people are learning more things and learning the skills that they want to learn. And if you notice, oh, we don't have anyone who's able to do that, finding someone else who can teach it. And making sure that no organization is reliant on one or a handful of people is really important, because I think then it makes it a lot easier to notice if you are feeling burnt out or tired and you need to take a step back, knowing that yes, what you're doing is really important, but it's not all going to collapse without you. There are other people who can fill that gap.
Yeah, thank you. I really thought that would be great for the audience to hear, because we've had this conversation a couple of times, so I knew it was a good answer. And I know, Marina, you have to head off for another session, but something I would just like to ask all the panelists before we close, we're not closing yet, but I'll ask you before you go, is just kind of if you had one message in a sentence to everybody here that's possibly thinking about starting a youth organization or wants to join one, what would you sort of say? I know that's quite a hard summary for a big question, but just as a takeaway for our audience.
Yeah, and I mean, you can answer that question for days, but short message would be really, really like understand your why. Like, what is your individual why? Like, why do you want to do this as an individual, whether it be start your own organization to accomplish a specific mission or join an organization? Because once you understand that why, it will become a lot like that will be something that you'll be able to lean back on when things are challenging, because things will be challenging. This is an environmental crisis. This is a climate crisis, and it's a biodiversity crisis, and that's interlinked with racial injustice, with sexism, with homophobia, with colonialism, and these are really hard things to grapple with. But if you understand your why, and know why you're there, that will be something that you'll be able to lean back on when things are challenging, and also will help you to help you to be more effective by being able to really hone in on your why and the specific thing that you're going to be able to accomplish. Because you can't do everything, but that's okay, because you don't have to, because there are so many other young people and non-youth allies that are doing incredible things that you're going to work with and collaborate with. So being able to like understand what your individual why is and why you're here, and really like go through questions, like question yourself pretty intensely about like what that why is. That would be just one.
Yeah, just one takeaway from what could be a 2-hour-long session in itself. But thank you so much for joining us. Do feel free just to pop off. I know you're in a session at 6 o'clock, so thank you for taking the time to join us.
Sorry that I have to go.
That's all right.
But I'll throw my email maybe in the chat, so if you have questions, you can just
so as a slight aside, now we've had one come in from the audience to Liz. Liz is no longer on my screen. I'm hoping she's still in the call. Yes, Liz, you are still there. You disappeared from my screen. I could see they're asking about a lot of what your work is about, nurturing young people to be the next conservationist or to be in conservation now. They're sort of just asking about how do you ensure that young people are gaining the skills? How do you turn that passion into an actual skill set, I guess, to prepare them for being the conservationists of the future? What sort of things can you do to achieve that, rather than beyond schools, or is schools the way?
Great, thank you so much, Joe. I hope I got the whole question. My connection is a little bit unstable. So yeah, how we get young people to really prepare them, I would say, to be change makers, is we try and, number one, connect the fact that we all need to pick different fields, or rather we all need to identify with the challenge around us. And so what we've tried to do is to try and make our training sessions and our involvement with the young people as practical as possible. And I'll give you an example. For instance, if we are teaching the young children about pollution, for instance, we do not want to just share the theory with them about pollution and then leave them to think around what they can do. So what we do is we will take the children to the nearest stream that is actually polluted, and they can see the problems around them. They can see how the river is in a mess. And I think one of the questions that I always say that the kids ask is, they have seen a river that's so polluted, it's in a mess, and they ask, who did this, but what can we do about it? So you really see the enthusiasm that is in the young people to want to do something about the challenges. And I see the best approach, and that is what we use, is a practical hands-on approach, making sure that they are directly involved for them to understand the challenges that surround them, and also make sure that they are involved for them to also understand that they can come up with solutions, or rather even get involved with the solutions that already exist. So I would advise of a hands-on approach where it's not just teaching, but they need to learn through experience. They need to learn by being involved in part of the solutions. And if you're talking about the fact that we're talking about nature regeneration, for example, they need to be part of the whole process. They need to be part of the solutions and part of the implementation of the nature-based solutions, for instance. So once they feel involved, you will realize that they are also doing the same in their communities. And at the end of the day, that's how they will end up transforming the world, because it begins with small acts multiplied by millions of us that end up making a difference at the end of the day.
Great, thank you, Liz. Yeah, a lot of great points in there as well. We are just about to come to a close, but I've just got one other question coming from the audience to KM. Specifically, I think it's picking up on the point that Callie mentioned earlier about the fact that we've now sort of joined together in the Million Letters campaign. And it's a question about how, let me just read this up. How important are collaborations and partnerships in youth-led organizations is the question. So I guess, yeah, that's the questions coming from the audience. I don't know if you were able to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, 1000% important. You had to put it on a spectrum. I mean, firstly, you know, it's very clear that there is power in numbers. And so teaming up and moving into cooperative action is critical. And the other thing, you know, and Izzy really highlighted this with this incredible, you know, protest that she was able to organize with her colleagues, is that we need a critical mass. Like this is no longer like just an issue that's affecting one community or one country. This is, you know, and for us to come up with real solutions, we need all, and I literally mean all disciplines on board. And it's not just conservationists or scientists or lobbyists. It's also engineers, architects, business people, corporates. We need Wall Street. We need, you know, we need all of the different industries and not just conservation industries on board for conservation. It is a sustainability issue. It is about transforming these systems and a society that is very skewed toward unsustainable and often discriminatory practices and at the expense of minorities. So it is very much an intersectional issue. And we need everybody on board for that.
That's our call to action then for the session. Everybody get on board. We need as a big team effort, as a global team. Very just about to wrap up now. We've only got 3 minutes left of our session. I guess sort of what I asked Marina before she left was possibly in a sentence, what would you say to any member of our audience that is about to start a youth-led organization or wants to join one? Yeah, in a sentence, what would you say? Any sort of advice, pearls of wisdom, anything from experience that you have learned? So I guess, Izzy, would you like to kick us off with the conclusion? Any sort of thing that they can take away?
Know what this is sort of similar to Marina's, but like know what you're fighting for, not just what you're fighting against. If you're motivated solely by anger or frustration or sadness, like that burns you out really, really quickly. And you're not going to be able to maintain that long term. And also those emotions might mobilize people like in one instant, but like they're very fleeting because people don't want to feel that stuff long term. And it's very difficult to feel that and maintain that long term. So find something that you're fighting for, something that brings you joy and hope and optimism, something that will tangibly improve your life and the lives of people around you. Like find that thing, because people are much more likely to fight for something than against something. Great.
KM, can I ask you the same? One sentence takeaway for everybody in the audience about youth-led organizations and sort of, yeah, anything.
Do it in your community. And if it's not already happening in your community, then be the one to start it.
Perfect. That was perfect. Thank you very much. And Liz, can I ask you just to close us off with one sort of final sentence for the audience about what you would say is the takeaway of this session?
Yeah, so we need hope, action, and change, and we are going to be the generation that is going to give that to the world. So we have to get going, identify with the solutions. They're going to make us angry and make us feel overwhelmed, but we won't stop at that. We have to also make sure that we develop that hunger to want to do something and then go ahead and do something about the challenges that we are seeing around us.
Perfect. Thank you very much to all of our panelists. It's been great having you. I wish we could stay for longer, but we're slightly just running over. I would just like to again say thank you, and I'm sure the audience, there's a lot of thank yous coming in from the audience. So I'm sure we'll be able to follow you all on Instagram and keep up to date with everything that's going on. Just a final part from me before I close off, just to quickly, something that young people can get involved with today. Anybody here? You've heard this mentioned quickly. KM Rose has mentioned it as well. The 1 Million Letters campaign. We amplify our conservation and education work through storytelling by asking youth worldwide to write letters addressed to world leaders advocating for the protection of nature. And we match every letter with $3 towards conservation, which, if you want to reference, that's enough to save a classroom-sized area of forest. So if you are feeling the need to write a letter, we can send you all the links to how to get involved with that. And yeah, generally you've seen the slide with James before. Get involved, share, and as many of the panel said, go out there and get involved. There's always an opportunity, and if there's not an opportunity, find one, as long as it's well planned and well thought out and you've identified your goal and don't drift from your mission. So thank you to everybody for joining. That is our session today, and a reminder, tomorrow we'll be back to talk about conservation and the power of young storytelling. I just really want to thank again all our speakers, all our panelists, to KM, Izzy, Elizabeth, Marina, who's gone, Callie and James, and thank you so much to everyone, and see you all tomorrow. Thank you very much. I think that's everything.
Thank you. Thank you
have the
so
fun
much,
the rest
everyone.
of the IUCN.
Thank you.
Please do come on time tomorrow, because we're going to have the coolest session ever. This one was great. Tomorrow is also going to be amazing, and it's going to start off running.
Thank you very much. Bye, everybody. Nice to meet you all virtually.
Thank
Bye.
you.
All right.